are the supplies or materials that we need to make today's project, which is a stuffed Christmas tree pattern. And we are working with Simplicity 9649, which is a vintage pattern. We'll get to that in a minute. So to make this particular project, and really there are lots of different patterns to make trees, so they're all kind of put together the same. So if you have a different tree pattern, you can still make it. It's kind of the same thing, to be honest. But anyway, here's what we need. We're going to need our fabric. We will need thread, fabric scissors, straight pins, a disappearing marker. That's optional, but I'll show you how I use it for cutting out patterns, and I think you'll like this. We will also need the pattern itself, and we will need polyfill. I like the brand Polyfill for stuffing the stuffies and to make pillows and all of that kind of stuff. So I do recommend Polyfill, and you can get that in the craft store. You'll need a sewing machine. This is a machine project. And to close up the bottom of the tree after we've finished stuffing it, there's a little bit of hand sewing, so you will need a hand sewing needle. And I actually use embroidery floss to stitch together these heavier duty projects. I just find it's easier to manage. Now, if you choose to put the star on top of the tree, you can cut that from another fabric. What I recommend actually is using a little bit of felt. I think it holds up really well. And when I made my vintage inspired tree last Christmas, I stitched using running stitch around the sides of the little felt star, and that's how I closed it up. So, okay, that's what you're going to need. You can find the supply list on the blog post, which will be linked in the description below. And okay, let's jump in and talk about what we're going to do to make this little tree. I'm set up now and I'm ready to cut, and here's what I want you to see. I want you to see that I have turned the fabric so that it's right sides together. So the pretty side is on the inside and this is the wrong side of the fabric. And I'm doing this so that it's going to be easier for me to mark the pattern. And you can see how I've got 2 thicknesses of fabric. So what that means is when we go to cut this out, we're cutting 2 thicknesses of fabric at one time. You'll notice this line. And what this line means is grain line. And when you see this line, you want to set this up so that it is parallel to the selvage. And the selvage, you'll recognize that because that's the edge that's got the printing on it, and it's got your colors laid out, all of that stuff. This is your selvage edge. And then when we look at the notations on this particular pattern, we're going to see that there are these little holes at the bottom, and we're going to mark those. Okay, this is where you're going to leave the bottom of your tree open. So this outer edge is our cut line. That's where we're going to cut. And then this is the stitch line. This indicates your seam allowance, and it's a 1/4 inch seam, just like in quilting. So we're going to start sewing here, okay, and then we're going to go all the way around, da 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 da, and when we get to this dot, we're going to back stitch, and then we're going to come back, and then we're going to stitch just this little bit, okay, and then we'll have 2 openings. All right, and then what we'll do is we'll clip in our corners, and we'll probably nip a little bit off the top just so we have sharp points. We'll probably nip here just so it's nice, and then we'll probably clip these curves a little bit just so that it flows better, and I'll show you that when we get to it. But I wanted you to see, I don't have any like fancy pattern weights, so I just put down what I have, which is just this, hodgepodge of my sewing tools. And what I like to do, now you could, if you don't have the disappearing ink marker, what you can do is you can simply pin the pattern and cut around it. But I like to trace my pattern, and to me it's just easier. So we're going to go ahead and trace out this pattern. That's the outline. Now what I want to do is I want to mark the areas where I'm going to leave openings. So I'll just find where that little dot is, and I'm just going to mark it here. The other thing that I like to mark is this. So it shows you your stitch line, and so when you get to this point, this is where you're going to pivot the sewing machine needle, or pivot around the sewing machine needle. So what I like to do is I like to come in, I like to find that point and mark it. Okay. It's better in person, but I can see where I've got all that tree laid out. I can see my stitch lines, everything. So the next thing I'm going to do is to lay out the next tree that we have to cut out. My two trees are cut out and I've got them pinned together. The sewing machine is ready to go. I just ran a line of test stitches, and so what I'm going to do is I'm going to start along the bottom edge where I've got this yellow straight pin indicating a start line. And I have on my machine, I use this line of tape that I set up to help me with keeping to the 1/4 inch seam allowance. It can be a little bit tricky, but this is how I do it. So let's go ahead and we'll backstitch, and then we'll just work our way around. And you just want to take your time because we are sewing a curve. They can be tricky, and if you need to just kind of scooch it around, just put the needle down into the fabric, lift your presser foot, and scooch it around. Now what we are doing, if you recall, when I laid out the pattern, I put those dots at those corners. So what I'm doing is I'm going to sew to this dot. And if I need to crank the hand wheel to get right in the dot, that's fine. Okay, I'm in the dot. Then what I'm going to do with the needle down is pick up the presser foot and turn the work completely, and then line it up with that 1/4 inch seam guide. And that's how you're going to turn all of your corners. So now we're going to sew to that dot. It's perfectly fine if you need to crank it by hand for a couple of stitches. There's no problem at all doing that. Okay, and then we're going to turn it. Just take your time with this. You want to make sure that it's nice and smoothed out. We don't want it bunched up. And anytime that you're sewing something that is like a corner or a point, this is how you're going to do it. You're going to, we call it a pivot, where the needle is down and then you pick up the presser foot and you just turn the sewing. We do this a lot. And see how it's getting a little bunched up? I'm just going to put the needle down. I'll remove that pin so it's out of the way. And just smooth it down. It's a little bit fussy, but I won't lie to you. And then we're in that dot. But you know, if you just take your time, you'll be fine. And I'm working my way to the top point. Needle down, and then a really big pivot. Have my two trees all sewn together, and before we turn them we want to do a little bit of clipping, and we do that so that when we turn it out we have a smooth result, because we want to have nice crisp edges to our tree. The points, we want them all to be nice and crisp, and we want our rounded parts to be round, so we have to do a little bit of work to get there. So I'm going to start at the top, and you know, we've got this point, and what we're going to do is we're going to trim away just a little bit here, and you don't want to cut your stitches. And then, like anytime I do a point, I always sort of take a little bit of fabric off on either side, but don't cut your stitches. If you cut your stitches, you're going to be very sad because then you'll wind up with a hole, and you don't want a hole in your tree. I could make a joke about a holy tree, but I'm not going to. Okay. Right. Then when you get into this part, so where it comes in, you want to clip right into that that little edge, just like that. And you could take some of that excess fabric out. Just don't cut your stitches. That's the big thing. Don't cut your stitch line. If you take your time doing this, I mean, it just really does make a difference. And honestly, it's worth doing it because, you know, this is like an heirloom project. You can make this, and you either can get it, use it every year yourself, or whomever you gift it to can use it every year. Okay, now we're into this little rounded part, and we're going to do it up here too, but so we clip in without cutting our stitch line, and then what we want to do here is we want to take notches. So I'm going to just nip and nip. And this works better if you have really great scissors, but I have what I have and I make the best of it. So I only use these scissors on fabric and to cut pom-poms. I've done one of the trees, and I want you to see how it looks once it's turned and it's pressed, and it looks really, really great. So we're ready to turn the other one, and I want you to see that it feels kind of weird because you've sewn this center part and you think, how am I going to turn it? I've sewn this together. Well, you're just going to reach into one side because you've got the two holes on the bottom, and this will make more sense in a minute. But just reach into one side and just pull the work through one of those holes. Okay, just like that. We're just going to pull it out. And because I had to stop and think about it, I was like, how am I going to turn this? Well, you just pull it through one of the holes. And I mean, this is what it looks like. You're going to be like, what in the world have I made? Well, just keep going. Yeah, that's kind of what sewing is. You just have to keep going. So what you're going to want to do is you're going to really want to take some time, and you want to be gentle about it, but you're going to go through and you're going to work all the little points out. Okay, so I'm kind of just working up one side of the tree, and it's hard to get your hand in there because it's not a big opening, but you're just going to work it all the way up. And I use that little knitting needle. You could use a point turner, you could use a chopstick, whatever you've got, and just use that to really get everything out and get it nice and neat and even. And because you want good points. I want you to see also that, take that away, see how there's no puckering. Okay, all of our curves are nice. There's no puckers at all. That's what you're going for. So take your time with this, and you will be rewarded with this nice non-puckered tree. I've got both trees pressed out. They're ready to go, and you can see like I've just pressed in the seam allowances on the bottom here so that that's all nice and neat. So when it's time to hand stitch that, it'll be easy enough. So here's how you do this. You put your trees together, and the biggest thing is to line up your tops. Okay, so line up the topmost point, and you want to get the bottom lined up where the where it's closed. So we're going to go ahead and pin this top. Essentially what we're going to do, we're going to pin the two trees together, and then we're going to do a stitch line right down the middle, and that is the foundation for the tree. And once we have that together, what you have is 4 little compartments, and then we're going to stuff those. So let's just pin this together, and we'll stitch down the center. Alright, we've done our stitch line down the center. We've attached these two finished trees together, and basically you can see what we've got is this little opening, and it's a little opening. It is really small to get our stuffing in, and that gives us 4 little separate trees. And so what we're going to do is we're going to take that pillow stuffing and put it in. What you're going to want to do when you stuff is get your stuffing all the way to the top. So you want to go to the top and then work your way down. If you don't get the top where you want it, you can't get your hand back up in there. My tree is all stuffed. I've got it all together. I closed up everything on the bottom except for one. I wanted you to see what that looked like on the bottom. So when you turn it up, you're going to wind up having, like, you know, the 4 compartments, and you're going to have to sew each one of these. So after you get your stuffing in, you're going to pin the bottom together, and you've already pressed really nicely, so your seam allowance is turned over. And we're going to use, I use ladder stitch. You could use an overcast stitch, whatever works for you. And I want you to see, like, my stitching is not perfect, and I used to like wig out about that, but now I've decided it's okay, because it's a handmade item. It's not supposed to be perfect. And like, so this isn't get over the perfection thing, because it's still really, really cute. And I'll give you a tip. So whenever I sew anything together like this, I use embroidery floss, that's what this looks like. And I like embroidery, so I already have this on hand. I use embroidery floss. I use a little bit larger embroidery needle, and I do that because to me it's easier to handle than just the cotton thread. The thread is so fine, and you've got to pull a little bit to get your stitches done. So the issue with that is the thread can break, and it's hard to handle. And I just find that having just 2 thicknesses of the embroidery floss, and that's how I sew all my stuff together. So that's just my tip. And I'll show you the topper I did with felt, and then I just did a little running stitch around the edge, and we'll just pan up here so you can see the top, and I just leave a little bit in the bottom, and it just goes on there, just rests on the top, and that's kind of how it is. It's sort of whimsical, and maybe we want to have it more like that or something. I don't know. We'll play with it. But yeah, that's it. There it is. And we'll close this up with a better picture of it so you can see it in all of its finished glory. But I think it's adorable. I also have a newer version of this type of pattern. That's a McCall's pattern. I'm going to make that for you later in the year. But if you can get your hands on this little vintage tree, I really recommend it. I think it's the cutest little pattern. It is my favorite. It's just, I don't know. It's just, it's the right size. It's just, yeah. It's a great little project. So anyway, that's how you make. That is Simplicity 9649, the vintage version. That's the little stuffed Christmas tree in that package. And I hope you enjoyed it. And I can't wait to see the trees that you all make. And I hope that you enjoyed this fun little Christmas in July setup. And let me know what your favorite was. And are you going to make the trees, and are you going to make the napkins? Because, guys, I love both of them so much. So, all right, that's today's video. I really appreciate you being here, and yeah, I'll see you in the next project.